First, thank you, Andre, for the introduction, and thank you also for inviting me to be here. It's very exciting to be at this conference. I've known about Quuppa for quite a while. I've used it in a couple of different contexts. So in this particular case, I get to talk about this thing that we did pretty recently. I'm here from the Museum of the Future, as Andre introduced me, and the museum is sorry, where's the remote? Okay, the museum is what we call an expansive, interactive destination. The term immersive is used a lot, and for us, we want to get past that. We're not trying to put people into a confined space. We're trying to actually expand their boundaries and their imagination. In many ways, the museum is not a target for the shiny object. It is not about just creating new product destinations or about innovation. It's about something that's significantly more humanistic. And to that degree, the real thing that we're doing is telling the story of space and time and our imagination. So this is why my talk is called Finding Us. In many ways, the idea of a museum of the future really is about where we see ourselves going. Okay, so how many of you have been to Dubai? Anyone? Great, wow, like quite a lot of people. Okay, so I'm gonna play this video because one of the interesting thought experiments that somebody gave me is, if you want to talk about the future, what if you could go back into the past and people ask you, what is the future like? And one of the most interesting things about Dubai is the fact that we can see this transformation in sort of hyperspeed from a very short perspective. So this is Dubai roughly 45 years ago, okay? And you can see the transformation that happened, and I think some of you may have actually seen some of this in real speed. In the late 2000s, the rate of building was just astronomical. And in many ways, the Museum of the Future is here really because of this vision that came about when Dubai gained its independence, when Dubai was founded. Dubai was founded roughly in 1971, and the Museum of the Future is set in a 50-year future in 2071. But right now, this is where we've gone through this trajectory. In 2013, the museum was conceptualized, and in 2017, there was a competition. Sorry, 2015, there was a competition for the architecture for the museum's edifice. It was won by Sean Killa, and this was at the World Government Summit that the idea was initially announced. And the concept has taken root in a lot of different ways to finally come to the thing that we have today as the Museum of the Future. But the edifice is there, and the question was really about what is it that we put inside? What is the experience that we want to talk about? And in a way, we are trying to figure out what is this 50-year outside narrative, and this is Dubai's vision of 2071. But it's not simply about the edifices that we're seeing here. This is one of the paths that we explore in the museum's exhibition experiences. But it's also about how we tell the narrative or the path of how we are all traversing this idea of the future. I mean, we all think about the future. I think we've all spent a lot of time with discussions about it. Science fiction has given us a lot of different input about it. And in a way, like one of our most compelling ways of considering what the museum is has been to go, the museum is really a story. Like the future as a story is the way that we can convey what this thing is. Everyone comes at it from a slightly different perspective, so I'm going to try and give you just this very high philosophical perspective today. And of course, like please jump into all of the technical details. Everyone here comes from a very technical background. We can kind of get into that, but I thought it would be significantly more fun to kind of talk about it from an elevated perspective first, from the end visitor experience. In all of our thinking about the Museum of the Future, we've had to consider what the end user experience is. What are the visitors going to get out of this? And in many ways, we see the museum as the gateway, like the first step that people can come through. One way that somebody mentioned it to me was, there's a child that's going to walk through the museum, and they're going to consider this their first foray into everything that the future really is about. So this will be their portal to the future, and that's how we want everyone to feel about it. And in many ways, the building really is like that. Now, when you talk about a narrative, there has to be a narrative arc. I think people know about the Joseph Campbell hero's journey. Like, have people heard about the hero's journey? Sorry, this is like the Star Wars idea where the hero comes through their process, they encounter certain challenges, they grow, they come out of it as a kind of evolved human being or an evolved person. Now, this is the kind of journey that we want to put people through. The museum really is about facing our challenges, but also providing an opportunistic or optimistic view on where we can go. We want to leave people with a call to action and a challenge for all the things that they can do. For us, this narrative arc is by going from outer space to inner space. This is both literal and figurative. By that I mean that we had to consider in our design, how do we keep like a storyline going through everything? In a way, like I'll bring all of this back to why this has relevance to navigation, because I think navigation is not a serial or a linear thing. And in our process, we've had to consider how we navigate people through a bunch of different ideas to take them through time and through space, and for them to buy into our imagination of what the future is, but to leave also with something tangible. So we start in outer space, literally in a place that we call Space Station Hope, which is the space station that the UAE creates. And the purpose of it is to collect energy in space through solar collectors and microwave them back to Earth. Now, a lot of what we have done is what I will call near viable speculative fiction. And by that, we mean we've consulted a lot of scientists and experts for the stuff that we built so that it's not purely flights of fancy. So we start in space, and then we bring people back into what we call the HEAL Institute, which is talking significantly more about the environment, how we deal with the ecology, the challenges that we face, and what possible solutions there are for it. Next, we come down to the future of wellness. Al-Waha means the oasis in Arabic, and we think that the future actually pushes us to focus significantly more on ourselves and the people around us. We can see this trajectory already happening. I would say in the 50 years that we have, when we look back 50 years and come forward, our capacity to connect to other people globally has increased. And we see that significantly growing, and to also put significantly more attention on ourselves. Any place like this that has the audacity to call itself the Museum of the Future, people are going to come in and want to see drones and flying cars and prototypes and things like that. So the way that we facilitate that is by having the Tomorrow Today floor. This is our partnership floor where we have temporary exhibits with experiences from innovations that are happening around the world. And finally, we have a children's floor as well. It's primarily a play area, but playfulness using different kinds of technologies for kids to actually engage in a much more free-form space. Okay, so the concept of the future is something that what we had always pushed for is to have this wow experience for people, to actually get them completely immersed into something that we thought was to extract their emotion. So for us, really, the future is an emotional state rather than just a destination or a time. And so everything that we have built is from this premise of how do we trigger these emotions. So I'll go back and through the cycle again of our narrative arc from outer space to inner space. In building this idea of emotional connection, we had to use the ideas of interaction significantly more than just what we normally see. When we think interactives, normally we think of a touch screen. This is sort of like what we've been brainwashed into considering at this point. On some level, it's easier, I think, because capacitive interfaces have made it so much kind of almost there's a laziness that has set in that we go, okay, that will actually solve for this problem of telling a story from a different dimension. But we actually wanted to go significantly farther than that. So you can see in this that our exhibit designer partner, so Atelier Bruckner is our exhibition designer, and they took the ideas of texture and materiality to a level that the ideas of space normally don't have. All of us have seen whatever, sci-fi movies or TV shows, and we see materiality of the future, materiality of space as something that's very sparse, very minimalistic, very like kind of white and clean, almost sanitized. And what we've done is taken it to a more kind of felt experience. We use 3D printed materials that are part of the textural space. The interactions themselves have a lot more physicality. Our design partners, or the creative design partners on this floor, are AltSpace, who built the largest rendered view of Earth. So essentially, you are on Space Station Hope flying over Earth, and the interactive experiences have a physicality to them as well. Now, these kinds of interfaces, normally you would think, oh, we may as well have a touchscreen. But there was a very purposeful decision made to put dials and knobs and things that people could touch onto this, because we wanted to bring back the sense of tangibility. In a way, memory is part of how we navigate through ideas, and we had to give people some tactility into these kind of interfaces. I'll speak about this a little bit more as I go through. The next space that we go down is on the fourth floor. Like, we have this transition carrying people from outer space back to Earth to this idea of ecology. Obviously, we're all aware of things like climate change, the problems that we're dealing with the environment and ecology, and how we need to potentially adjust our behaviors. These are some of the things that we present on this floor. We're trying not to shy away from some of the more harsh realities that we're dealing with, but also provide mechanisms of solution, or at least inspirations for solution. Again, we use a lot of different types of interactive modalities. The main area that you're seeing in the middle is called the library. It's a set of specimen jars, 2,400 jars with different organisms that are printed in glass inside. It's an Instagrammable moment. Like, every one of these spaces, people come in and they can have an experience without ever engaging in detail. But we also have to provide these layers where people actually want to learn more and buy into our narrative and have takeaway moments. So this is where we decided to use a handheld device called the biosynth. And the biosynth is a mechanism for scanning these jars and getting more information, and we can put layers of challenges and different kinds of content on there. And this is where we can tell the story of what we're trying to do through these kinds of mechanisms. Now, this is where we use Quuppa aggressively right now, or very actively right now. We had to find a mechanism for people to be able to navigate this space and to be able to find the jars. The limitation right now is that we're dealing with 2D space. We'd love to figure out a solution for 3D location tracking with high enough resolution. So in our specific instance, it's been a combination of fiducial markers that use an infrared scan and a 2D positioning using Quuppa. This is where the updates in Quuppa locators have been incredibly helpful for us. Resolution has been fantastic, and I'll get into that a little bit more in detail as well. Now, when you talk about engagement, you have to kind of use every different trick that you have available to you. I think a lot of the partners here have aggregated solutions, so you understand you have to use Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Quuppa, RFID, whatever you can, in order to kind of create a collective experience. There are some realities to how we deal with a museum space that you can't use just as one solution. Like, for example, when we're trying to scan for this interaction to get what we call the regen lab, where a collected set of artifacts are put in and you end up growing a new species, to do that was significantly better using a wristband, because that gestural interface is already learned by people. A lot of this stuff comes down to how do you teach people very quickly what these new interfaces are. I think this goes to the point that Sammy made about how do you train people to understand what this technology is very quickly. But we can go into that a little bit later as well. On the third floor, we come down, and this is where I was talking about wellness, focusing on the self. So Alwaha is a space that we wanted people to actually distance themselves from technology altogether. It's this place that we tried to put as few screens as possible. And also, initially, we had a reward model for saying, you put your phones away, and we'll actually give you a treat at the end. Obviously, doesn't work. The problem with it is, I mean, firstly, Dubai loves Instagram, but the world loves Instagram, and sadly, we created something that's like, people sit and have their selfie sticks and come and pose and all this other stuff. But it's also a super playful environment. So it gives us the facility to get people to engage in different ways. So here we actually deployed a haptic interface called Ultra Haptics, where people can feel a sensation, and there's a narrative around that. They move through a space that reacts to them, and the final image is of a water sculpture that we're playing with light. So we see visual feedback all the time through screens. But the idea of seeing reflections of water through light is so amazing and so compelling that we've had visitors who are there for hours, literally. I think there was one gentleman who was there for 5 or 6 hours, who sat there and went through this whole thing. And all of these are generative. They're like different things that are happening all the time. It's not just a single loop. These videos are slightly deceptive because it makes it feel like they're just a couple of people coming through. We have roughly 2,000 visitors that come through the day. It's kind of packed. In a way, I wish that we could limit how many people go through the space because the experience gets better. But we also have found that experiences like this are better with other people. Those people who do these things, the VIP tours that happen, I think get a significantly diminished experience than the people who go in with the full experience. Through all of this, we've had to also think about what the demographics are for each floor. So there's a textual, visual, and narrative context that we have for each of the floors that provides something different for each person. On the space floor, there's a lot of tactility, a lot of technical stuff, and there's a certain kind of demographic that really buys into that. On the wellness floor, there's all of the stuff that makes you stop and kind of focus back on yourself. I was having a conversation with Alex yesterday. This thing that happened that we found very unexpected, which is on the wellness floor, we initially did not think it would be particularly popular. What was surprising for us is that people now line up for a 90-second experience that is very, very subtle. And I think what's happened is that people are so hungry for something that is not visual that when we provide this, it gets them to kind of loop back on themselves. So this thing I was saying about this gentleman who sat and watched water reflections for hours, this is not, I think, unusual. Everyone who comes and sits there is at least there for 5 minutes, which is a very long time in museum world. Like, generally, engagements are on the 2 to 2.5 minute range. So when you get a person to sit down and go through this, it's really revolutionary for us, and it's also very heartening to know that these kinds of experiences are what people are really engaging with. And speaking of engagement, we can talk about engagement from the perspective of all of these interactive exhibitions, but really what we want is the future of engagement, or the future being engagement between people and getting into a sense of conversation. Now, that idea of conversation is obviously complicated because there's operational overhead in it. So through this whole process, we've also thought about how do we put points of conversation into what those engagements are. This is where technologies like Quuppa are incredibly important for us as we look out into the future as well. So through all of these experiences, we have what we call an AI. I personally don't like the term AI, so I will call it an augmented intervention rather than intelligence. And that intervention is for a recorded person on a screen. This is actually one of our colleagues, Matha, who we call Aya as the guide through the entire experience. And she is present through every part of the museum exhibitions, providing context or information of what's going on. Additional to that, we've put real people into different exhibits. We take recordings of them and include them in what we try to bring as the future back to today's reality. So Amani Aldrous is one of our colleagues who we also put into the role of Chief Medical Officer on Space Station Hope. And we keep adding these kinds of interventions so that there's this sense of the future isn't something that's so far away, it's something that we can grasp and be connected to. And finally, we also have staff that are visible throughout all of the floors who actually are the people who are already in 2071 and they're the ones welcoming visitors into our world. So it's kind of a scenographic or theatrical experience as well. And ultimately, we find that when there are moments or when there are opportunities for our staff to engage with people, visitors are significantly more compelled, and they leave with something that feels more like a call to action. Additional to that, our staff is also incredibly happy about it. In those cases where they feel distanced from visitors, where they're just guiding people through, they don't feel as compelled about the experience as when they can engage in a conversation. And we've had this feedback multiple times. I can say all this, and those are all like kind of stock images, but we also have the reality of us monitoring how these things work on a day-to-day basis. So the first is our interactive table that I mentioned, that we have these haptic dials. This is really how this looks every day. People are clamored around this. They will sit there, go through this. This is a story about how this energy collection system is working on Space Station Hope and how this energy is being beamed back. And obviously, we had to put an entire narrative together for it. But there's also a very physical component to this. I think a couple of people who've come to the museum have actually commented on this. It's one of the best implementations of a three-dimensional reactive table that I have ever seen. Obviously, I'm biased, but it's cool. And I'll show you a little bit of video on that later. The second is a space where we force people to actually come together to have a joint experience. So this is called the Universal Harmony Moment. Everyone comes together and they hum, and the collective hum, so we have microphones everywhere, collect all of that together. And when everyone hums together, we give them a reward. There's this moment of harmony, and there's a visual feedback to that. And finally, there are serendipitous moments also that happen, which is people come through the space and they engage with others through the stuff. And what I think is happening is when you see others do stuff, you're more inclined to do that stuff as well. One of the things that I have found slightly frustrating about museums and interactions, and this particularly goes for things like VR, is that it's very isolationist. I think we have the technology now to create ways for people to connect with each other as well. And this goes to this idea of what navigation really is. We navigate better together. You know, we actually like to flock together. We are social beings. And I think in a way, this is what actually ends up being the purpose of what we're doing. I want to next go to this idea of how all of this is created. The future obviously is created by someone, but it's also a process. There's not a destination. It's the path that we get there, right? And in all of this, the process of building has been, I'll say challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. This is the process that we went through for the Vault of Life on the 4th floor, the ecology floor, of how we were actually tracking. Now, the complexity for us was that the building was handed off to us in December, and the museum opened in December 2021, and the museum opened in February of 2022, basically 2.5 months. The construction was ongoing, so a lot of the stuff had to be built off-site. We could not test a lot of this stuff out while things were going. In a way, simulation helped to a certain degree. I think Adrian got to experience this in full first-hand glory of us having to run up and down 5 floors, which 5 9-meter or 13-meter floors, which was a lot of work. Anyway, the point being that trying to do some of this in a prototype space and then bringing it back also creates a certain amount of complexity because you don't really know how to calibrate for some of these things. The advantage that we had was that we could also all see what was going on. So in a way, remote work facilitated the idea of us being able to pull the story around the world for different teams and also think through what it meant and then walk through it almost with placeholders, even pieces of paper to kind of get a sense of how this would work. This is more important in cases like this ultra haptics experience where so our team for this was Deep Local, who are based in Pittsburgh in the US. And this is our creative director, Brendan McGettrick, who was sitting in my living room or in my kitchen trying to understand how this experience worked. And this was definitely one that we were not convinced was going to work well at all. That is a tea strainer, if anyone is wondering, because we had to kind of concoct different things that we had to put together. And so he is experiencing this thing while we also had conversations with our team in Pittsburgh, trying to understand how these experiences would work. So how do you convey this sense of physicality of experience over distance? We're all used to seeing things, but feeling things is quite a different experience. And then as we actually rolled this out, this was one of the first installs that we started going through. This is us testing how Quuppa works as we move through the space really fast. And the tracking was actually excellent. It exceeded our expectations. But there's also this thing of actually putting it all together. This Phil Marlowe is on the right. He's from AVI SPL, our integrator, who have been fantastic, honestly, to actually get us to where we needed to go. I was talking about the texturality or the materiality of the spaces. Our design partners, Galleria 12, did a lot of scenography work for this. And all of this went into a lot of also manageability questions. As we're building these things deteriorate. This is the state of the world. Everything breaks, everything has to get fixed. How do you actually get there and get it fixed by a team that's on premises? I think this is one of the biggest complications in the kind of higher resolution or more advanced technologies that we're working with, because as things break, you need to have an expert team on staff that can actually take it on and deal with it. And so we went through this process, and they've been incredibly foresightful about building these things out in a way that we could open it and kind of manage it and stuff. And this also allows us to think about how these technologies evolve and how we can make the exhibits better over time or adapt them over time. Okay. The design partners that we worked with are all over the world. We worked with partners basically from Moscow to LA. The main exhibit designer was Atelier Bruckner. I'm putting this up because it's also important for us that our partners are recognized in what they did. And this is only a sampling of them. I think there were over 100 different partners, considering Fit Out and everyone else. But these are the main design partners for the exhibition spaces. So Atelier Bruckner did the full exhibition design. Altair Stock did the Fit Out. AVI SPL was the integrator. And everyone else is from all over the world. Trying to manage this over distances while COVID was happening was an incredible challenge. And this image is something that we have, I would say, hundreds of photos of. And I think all of you do. You've all done this thing. And this is kind of nice to be in this space. But in a way, I also miss this thing because it got us to think about how everyone was in their own spaces. I think there's a homogenization that happens when we come into certain spaces. We all look a certain way, we dress a certain way, we come into this thing that defines how we need to behave. When you push people into their own spaces, you get to see a slightly different aspect of it. And I think there's a wonderful thing about that as well. And I'm always trying to figure out how do you bridge the two? This hybrid work situation is one thing, but I think there's a narrative in there that we are maybe missing out on. Anyway, it was a wonderful process to kind of work with companies around the world and to tell these stories to each other to build this all up. So, okay, I've talked a lot about this. I just want to play this thing, which is the kind of trailer for the museum, because for me, I think the future is now. We've built this. The museum is our iteration or our incarnation of the future. So I'm going to let this play out. I think one of the guiding principles that we used and that I found really helpful through the whole process, because you kind of have to have something to hold on to when it's a project like this. This is the largest project I ever worked on. The scale of technology was a lot. But there's this quote from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, the current ruler of Dubai, that says, "The future belongs to those who can imagine it, design it, and execute it. It isn't something you await, but rather create." This is a very compelling statement for me because this whole process of what we did was basically a reflection of this quote. And this is one of the quotes that's on the calligraphy of the museum's facade. I'm going to leave you all with one final thought, which is, when I was invited to this, I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I bring a piece of the museum here for people to experience? And it was like, what can they touch and hold? Because not everyone is going to make it to Dubai, although I hope absolutely everyone does. But one of the things that we have worked a lot with, and I think Dubai has maybe perfected, is the idea of scent. And I think one of the compelling things is that the future really is a memory. We all have a nostalgic sense of what the future is, and like commentary that we get or feedback that we get is that the future is this or isn't this or whatever, and you go, wait, like, it hasn't happened yet. It can be whatever you want it to be. What you're smelling right now is the smell of the future. So right now, the scent of the museum is being played into the room. We use scent compellingly on every floor. Each floor has its own scent. Some of the experiences themselves have scent. And it's been a very hard one to really calibrate for and to feel out. But I think in Dubai, almost every space has its own smell. And it's a way for also getting people to kind of tie into different spaces. And I think there's a lot to be learned through what that navigation potential is in there. Overall, I think this idea of navigation really comes into this idea of like using these different modalities. The specifics of the scent here, it's called the Orchestration of the Future by a company called iScent. I can give you the details of what the composition is if anyone's interested. And that's it. Like, that's my talk. Thank you all for being here for this. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. We've had to deal with a lot of questions around this. So my name is Sundar Raman. If you want, reach out to me either now or afterwards.
What a project. What an experience. Thank you so much. And how many of you want to visit? You've done an amazing job. Everybody wants to go. They should give you a commission for how many people you get to Dubai.
I just get to take people around, so it's great.
It's wonderful. You've done such a great job. So many questions. I have a warm-up question, but please think of a question for him. Technical, philosophical. You're open for everything. Right?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Okay. My first question: are you sure that you're not from 2071 yourself?
No, I am from 2071.
There, I thought you looked like somebody from 2071. But to be honest, isn't the name a misnomer? The Museum of the Future. It could have been, the Center of Future Technologies, but the word, why did you insist on using the word museum for something that is backward-looking traditionally to a place that brings us to look forward? It seems to be a misnomer, but why?
I think that's a great question. I think we get asked this relatively regularly, as you can imagine. It's also the most debated statement that we have, and the most debated word in Museum of the Future is the word of. Literally, we have spent hours talking about the word of, whether it should be a museum by the future, museum for the future. Anyway, all that. Yeah. Be that as it may.
That's what they do in 2071.
Yeah, exactly. We overanalyze in wordsmith. The idea of a museum, I think, is not about history. It's about giving us the capacity to understand a different world from the context that we're in. If you think about museums as the thing that was created, particularly in the Western world, in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, they were really about collections of somewhere else. It was really about how do you tell a story of a different place. For me, that's what's compelling about this, because I think the Museum of the Future really is our way of grappling with all the things that are around us. I actually don't think that there's a dichotomy at all. I don't think there's a conflict in the word itself. People have talked about this thing about whether it should be an experium, an exploratorium. I think the word museum has its own kind of history and maybe genesis, but it also needs to evolve to what we need to embrace. We've also talked about whether there should be, like, what does digital and technology mean in museums that are traditionally about art and like edifices. But even that has gone through an evolutionary process because it allows people to kind of interact with those elements in different ways.
Super. Thank you. Questions, comments? Way back there, please wait for the microphone and speak into the microphone if you can. Thank you.
Hi, Chris Curran. How do you actually track the people? Do you put a device around their neck? How's it done?
Currently, on the 4th floor, is this biosynth device that we created a board for. There's a daughter board that it's an Android device that we created a daughter board that has the QT1 tags built in. We track that device through the space. Like right now, we haven't deployed Quuppa tags widely, but the intention is a clip-on type of a device. We've gone through a lot of different considerations, to be honest. There are operational aspects to this that we really have to grapple with. The museum is a kind of a weird place to do this kind of stuff. The last place, or where I learned about Quuppa, was the deployment for Hyde Park Barracks in Sydney. Does anyone know about this one? Oh, okay. So I used to work for local projects, and so are you from there? Oh, awesome. So you know all the complexities around that. So yes. So we had to hang things around people's necks, and yeah. So the phone there obviously has its own set of challenges. I think we are currently limited by technological boundaries that are quickly diminishing. And I think we're close, maybe like 1 or 2 generations away from making it significantly easier. But when you think about clothing, Dubai is interesting in that we deal literally with the world of clothing. I used to live in New York. New York has nothing on Dubai. Like 192 countries come through Dubai, and there are 192 countries. They're not absorbed into Dubai. People come with their own clothing, their own culture, their own ways of being. And so each of those we have to adapt. So trying to put a lanyard-based hanging thing over somebody's neck that's wearing either a gutra, this is a male head covering, or an abaya, or a sari, or whatever, these kinds of things get complicated. How do you put something on a wrist? So these are the things that we have had to deal with a lot. So right now we're going with this clip approach. Let's see what happens. Operationally, we think we have solved certain challenges with this, but I am sure that it will evolve.
So a clip-on,
yeah. It comes with a few different form factors, so they can wear it however they want.
Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Questions, comments? Back there in the back row. You're making Sari run today. That's good. Good.
Thank you. Aren't you afraid that future may come quicker than expected, so that you become, let's say, in 5 or 10 years, a real museum?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Could you tell us who you are? I don't know. That was a very good question.
I think that's a great question. This is one of the things that we grappled with a lot. This is why, for us, it's not a museum of technological innovation. It is not the museum of the drone or the prototype car or whatever, although we have all of those as well. It's really a museum with a narrative focus. It's the museum of humanity's aspirations. I don't think that story goes away. So in a way, the thing that we have built, the Instagrammable moments in the spaces, are the foundation upon which we can do whatever we want to do. We've already had to adapt. I'll give you a good example. So when we started the project, machine learning in real time as a web application was not possible for doing object scanning in 3D space with color and all this other stuff. Teachable machine and a bunch of other things through TensorFlow have made that possible in the last 6 months. I'm sure that all of this will change. But it doesn't mean that we have to forklift upgrade anything. We now have layers that we can put on top of this. So for us, it was always about what is the baseline story that doesn't go away? And technology is irrelevant, which is why, in a way, for us, technology became so much of the background. And I say technology is irrelevant, knowing full well that none of this stuff would work without technology. We had to background it in a very seamless way. So, like, for example, ultra haptics. We haven't seen another technology that's like that's tangible, that's like a touch thing that gives you a sense of tactility. I'm sure things like that will come. But if we have to swap that out, it's not like, oh my God, we have to rip everything out and put this new thing in. It's just an evolution of specific things. So we had to be super flexible about how we design these experiences. Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent question. Any more questions? One more from down under.
It occurs to me that the technologies in and of themselves are part of that future. Is there any place within the museum where you show the people that are coming through the concepts of the sort of technologies that you're using? And it sort of goes to Sammy's point about educating people about location and those sort of aspects. So within that complex, is there somewhere where they understand how a Quuppa technology works, or how the haptic technology works, or something like that?
This is something that we are grappling with, to be honest. We don't currently have a place that people can come and get the full narrative. I mean, like, we give this narrative as part of the experience. So the museum is a guided tour. It's not like just randomly people can go to any floor. They come in, they're taken on the lift experience, go to the 5th floor, 4th, 3rd. So at least we can tell the story in the way that we want to some degree. Those people who are interested always end up getting directed towards one of our technical staff. We have AV staff on the floor all the time, and we get into as much detail as anyone is interested in getting into. In a way, our first front really is to get people to buy into this idea, because we also get a lot of feedback of, oh, this is not futuristic enough, or this is not the future that I expected, or whatever. And obviously this is what we expect people to have, and it's a good sentiment to have, but because it also opens up the opportunities for conversation. Once that happens, then people go, oh, how does this work? Like, we have a lot of questions about how the tracking system works on L4. So we do talk about the fiducial marker and Quuppa. And there are a couple of people that we show them how this thing works, like you can see the IR and all of this stuff. But it is rare, to be honest. And I think it's an opportunity for us to do a lot more outreach and get people more engaged.
Thank you for that great question again. And we have one back there.
Hello, this is Javier from Spain. We have done a deployment in the Museum of the Past, which is the Prado Museum, and it's just the opposite.
Great.
So we were experiencing the same problem, so where to put the tag. So I wanted to share our experience in case it works. So we are actually using a badge, and people, if you tell them, look, this helps to improve the experience in the museum, and this helps the museum to control the capacity and so, people weren't complaining. If you go to Prado, you've got people from all over the world as well. And what we found is that people are not that refusing things. So we were expecting a lot more, people refusing the use, but what we have to say is that over 95% of the people just put it and walked, and registered the thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. We use wristbands right now, and initially there was some hesitation about how do we put wristbands on people, because there's also a certain amount of gender sort of conformity and stuff, where there's rules around how people touch each other and all that. But yeah, we've not had any issue with that. I meant more literally in terms of clothing. Like, to put a lanyard on, I've done this where it gets tangled up in your gutra, and then you're trying to remove it, and it's a mess, So so we're experimenting with some of that stuff, but you're absolutely right. People are very accommodating for when you give them the opportunity to have an experience. And they're also thrilled by it. I mean, you get to tell them the world that you enter into. Whether that's the past or the future or whatever, as long as you tell them this is the story, People will buy into your story, you know, which is very satisfying as well.
But isn't it
Thanks a lot for your...
But isn't it disappointing? I mean, I'd figure it would be some kind of halo that you can put on people. I mean, it is the museum of the future. I mean, these bands, wrist thing. What? I mean, it's really...
This is a good point. So one of the things
on.
that we grapple with really is how do you deal with gestural interfaces, right? I mean, one of the challenges we have today, very real, is that we've split the world into two kinds of people. There's the Android kind of people and the iPhone kind of people. And they literally cannot talk to each other, you know? Which is insane to me. It's like, it's such a bastardization of technology. But this is what we are also trying to avoid. Like, so we went through so many different things of like, what is this like futuristic experience?
Yeah.
You have to train somebody to do that instantly. So people are used to certain things. I think over time we can also adapt these. So this is also part of our sort of challenge to make sure that we can keep these interfaces expanding over time. But yeah, it's a very good point. We are trying to make the halo.
Ah, that's what I want.
You know?
Yes. One last question, and then we'll go for coffee. Sir, coming up. Did I miss somebody? Good.
Hi,
Right.
Michael from a company called Zoomtable dealing with light. Okay, the question is not about the light, but can you share with us your thought process? How did you choose the technologies that you decided to implement now, and how would this evolve in the future? What would be the thought process again to change something, update something, or move something into the future from the reality? I mean,
Do you mean specifically about Quuppa or
for
anything?
example, or any of the other technology? But Quuppa would be a great start, I guess.
Quuppa, it wasn't like there are that many options, you know. To be honest, it really is the best technology there is for this thing. So when we knew what that experience was, so for museum experiences or creative experiences, generally you start with what the end experience needs to feel like. And then you go, yeah, that's impossible today. You know, this is the standard thing because creative directors come to you and go, we want this holographic thing with like dinosaurs and, you know, space monkeys and whatever, you know, like, and it just doesn't work. And you go, okay, like how can we fake it? So there's a lot of scenography and theater and all this other stuff that we have to get there. But then you also think, what is the infrastructure that we can put in? Because as soon as we create version 1.0, creativity dictates that you go, yeah, that user experience is not great. Let's actually adapt it and make it better. Because there's always going to be this team that comes back and goes, but can we add X or but can we add Y? And so we had to purposefully think, okay, what is the technology that we could put in that could evolve with us over time? So we put Quuppa as infrastructure throughout the museum, knowing full well that we're not going to use it from day one. But we knew that we were going to go there. There was zero doubt in my mind. But it's also because from the scenography aspect of the museum, like we had to put stuff up in the ceilings and make sure this was all calibrated and that it worked with where the projector placement was and all that. So like a lot of those decisions were really about what is that final experience going to be. But we also went through this with our selection of what projectors do we use, what screens do we use, what network cable do we use, what like you go, okay, we have terrazzo that was poured. We cannot rip out the cabling later. We knew that at least for 5-6 years, we had to kind of future think how everything was laid out. But you also go, how much cabling do you put in there? Like this point yesterday about, oh, you're making infrastructure deployments easier because you're going to put less cable in. You always need more cable than you think. 100%. You all know this. Everyone's laughing, knows this. You always need more cable. You are like one day you'll come up there and they go, oh, there's this Ethernet that's unterminated. Oh my God, thank God somebody thought to put this up here because we need this, And it's happened to me already in the 3 years that I've been on this project, I mean, even in the 6 months of since opening. But yeah, some of these decisions had to very much accommodate for this vision of where we were going to go. And at the end of the day, I think there are only 2 or 3 real solutions that can get there today. It's not like there's a wide market of solutions. So we had to get to that level of what's consistent, what's really good, and what keeps us going. So I think I'm probably over my time.
And I thought the future was wireless. You have all these wires all over the place. I'm really disappointed. We understand. Listen, we are now a little bit out of time, but we do have a coffee break. You're here for 2 days.
I'm here until tomorrow.
You're going to the Music Museum tomorrow.
Apparently.
Lucky you. Lucky you. And love to get your take on the technology available there. It's, these are such exciting spaces. Great that museums are a place that people want to go to, absolutely. That's a great phenomenon, and you definitely are leading that revolution. Let's give him a very big hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'm sure Sundar is available for questions around coffee and for the next 2 days, aren't you?
Yep, thank you.
You look like the sociable type. Yes. Very good. Thank you so much. So it is a break, and then